Bruchim Abayim to the 10th Shir in the series of Shir on Midos, that is the 10th lecture on the 13 hermeneutical principles of each exegesis, which were used by the sages of the Talmud in order to explain, interpret, and explicate Scripture. We were speaking last week about the change in paradigm between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael, which, as we see sometimes in Chazal, emerges as a dispute between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. I mean, we give an example of a klal u'prat klal as opposed to a riboy u'miyut riboy. In other words, the change in paradigm many times is expressed in Chazal as being a dispute. In the case of klal u'prat klal, riboy u'miyut riboy, is being a dispute in how to approach the interpretation of Scripture. I wanted to give another example. It's always good to give another example of a machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Yishmael, which in my opinion expresses also the change in paradigm, going from the concept of a logical rule to an understanding of the very, very orality of the Scripture itself. There's a famous machlokes, a drasha between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael, which is how many batim do I make in the tefillin? I guess the tefillin shalvash. Okay, in fact, actually, it's actually how many parishes, how many batim. The reason we get an inkling that the machlokes here is involved because there's a dispute between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael, but the fact is no nafkamina, they both take the same position. The machlokes is how to dash in the psukim. So a machlokes like this certainly says darsheni. So
because the halacha is halacha
right, no, because well, actually, the Gemara in Sanhedrin does say halacha l'mashe b'sina.
And the Rambam says that is
right, halacha l'mashe b'sina, right? And the Gemara says the Mishnah says explicitly in Sanhedrin, I think Pekassim and Beit says halacha l'mashe b'sina, right? But in any case, there's a machlokes had a dash in this from the psukim. Now the Gemara, which I have in front of me, is in Menachos Daf Lamed Dalet and Beis. It says 3 times the Torah l'toitafos, right? But in 3 times it says l'toitafos, and the baraisas is like this. Tana Rabban, the rabbis learn. In Lamed Dalet Reish Amud Beis in Menachos. It says 3 times the Torah l'toitafos, l'toitafos, l'toitafos. Now, the 2 times it says l'toitafos, there's no vav whatsoever. It's spelled Lamed Tes Fei Saf. The 3rd time it says toitafos. It's spelled Lamed Tes Vav Tes Fei Saf. In other words, there's a vav between the 2 tesses. Okay? So Tana Rabbanan, the toitafos, or the tetfos, whatever it is, the toitafos, Harei Kan Arba, Rabbi Yishmael. So we can. In other words, the first toitafos is singular, there's no vav, that's 1. The second toitafos is 1 too, it's in the singular. And the toitafos with the vav has a vav there, that indicates that it's plural. So you have 1 plus 1 plus 2 equals 4. And that's the Rabbi Yishmael. And Rabbi Akiva says, Eino tzarech, you don't have to make a drasha like that. Interesting, Eino tzarech. Why do you make a drasha like that? Have another drasha. Rabbi Akiva says, tes, I guess, toit. The katfi is an African language, or is a type of language, is 2. And pas, or fois, ba'afriki in African, is 2. So, toitafos, right? Tes, pei saf. So, you take the 4-letter word, tes, pei saf, you divide it into 2 words. Each word is part of some type of a language, exotic language. One is African and one is Katfi. I'm not exactly sure what you call it, but in any case, it's some type of certainly an Oriental language, or African language. So, tes, toit is 2, and pei saf is 2. So, it says like an interesting drasha, 4. What's the machlokes? What's Rabbi Akiva saying? What's Rabbi Yishmael saying? I mean, you know it's what you see anyway for the Gemara that you mentioned. It's very interesting, just as an aside, I never really understood Rabbi Akiva's drasha. What is tes 2 and why is pei saf 2? But I saw in a sifra of Rabbi Nadal So he has an interesting little, called a shtickle Torah, he has a little piece on this. So he says, the concept of two can be expressed in two ways. It's either a repetition of something, right? Or it could be that you make a change in something. So for example, he says, Vishinamtem. So the word Vishinamtem can be understood as meaning two things. Vishanot means to repeat over again, to repeat twice, or a shino, it can be a change. In other words, there's two ways of expressing the number two. Two-ness can be expressed as a repetition, or can be expressed as a break in something. Something doesn't continue, continue ad infinitum. So he says like this. Toitafai, so test is repetition. One test comes after another test. Pay test, voice, he says, it sounds like a break, like pop, poop, pulse. In other words, it sounds like a break, you break something. So he says, tak, pois. In other words, in Katfi, in this language of Katfi, whatever Rabbi Akiva says, so the notion of tunis was said by repetition, so that's toit. And in African, the notion of a repetition of two was said as a break. Pois, that's what he wants to say. Okay, in any case, now, what's the machlokes? Now, what's interesting is that when you learn the Gemara, you figure that the vav indicates plurality, but really that's not true. Because if toitafais is going to be plural, the vav should be between the pay and the saf, not between the tes and the tes. And in fact, Tosefta says that question. The Rebbe Tam makes a svara, makes a drasha, the Tosefta reject it. It's not clear what the drasha of Rabbi Yishmael is. Because Tosefta wants to say that maybe take the vav and put it somewhere else, but in any case, the Tosefta rejected. I'm referring to the Tosefta Diba Maskal, Toitafis, not the Tosefta. That, according to that Tosefta, it's not clear at the end what Tosefta's maskana is. In any case, I would like to explain the machlokes very simply. First of all, toitafis is obviously an African term. It means jewelry. I mean, the second Tosefta says this. Rabbi Akiva says it. The Tosefta says it. The Rashba says it in the Kedusha Goddess of Chosh Baruch Hu, wears tefillin, the Avov and Bochais. Toitafis is an African term. So, for example, so it is true that if I read toitafis as a Hebrew term, so if I want to make it plural, the vav should be between the pei and the saf. Rabbi Yishmael's point is, we're going by the abstract principle. Is that what the meaning of the word is? It's the abstract principle. The abstract principle is, if I have a word, repeated twice, and then it appears a third time with a vav, even though the vav doesn't make the meaning of the word to be plural, nonetheless, I have the outline of an abstract principle of two words without a vav, another word with a vav, 1 plus 1 plus 2 equals 4. In other words, Rabbi Yishmael is extracting the abstract principle independent of the meaning of the word. In other words, the vav of toitafis, which appears between the two tets, and not between the pei and the saf, doesn't make the meaning plural, but on an abstract level, the inclusion of the vav in one of the words, right, abstractly indicates singular, and plural. So in other words, how is Rabbi Yishmael darshaning? Rabbi Yishmael is darshaning the abstract principle. I have a word that appears 3 times in the Chumash, 2 times it appears without a vav, 1 time it appears with a vav. So if I would consider that to be sort of like an abstract principle of any words which are in Lashon HaKodesh, right? The skeleton, abstract principle is singular, and plural. So Rabbi Yishmael is darshaning the abstract principle of singular, and plural. Says Rabbi Akiva, why should you darshan the abstract principle? Darshan the word itself in its native Gilgal in African or Katfi. In other words, tes means 2 in Kasfi, and pei saf means 2 in African. In other words, Rabbi Akiva is darshaning the actual meaning of the word, what the word means, right? Even in the African. So in other words, what's the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael? So Rabbi Yishmael says, look, I can't darshan the word. It's African, or whatever it is. It certainly is not following the rules of single and plural in terms of Lashon HaKodesh. But I'll darshan the abstract principle of minus vav, plus vav. I mean, Rabbi Akiva says there's no reason to do so. Look at the word itself. Take the word itself, see what it means in African and Kasfi, and it means two. The first part of the word means two in Kasfi, the second part of the word means two in African, and you get four. So Rabbi Akiva is just looking at the actual meaning of the word in those two languages. So what's the machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael? Rabbi Yishmael is darshaning the abstract skeleton principle, the most abstract notion of singular versus plural. And Rabbi Akiva is going to the actual meaning of the words itself. In fact, more than the actual word meaning of the words. According to Rabbi Gedalia, he's saying, look, tes is written what it means. It means two, and it's written tes. Pas, or feis, is written what it sounds what it means. In other words, tes is written what it means, and pois sounds like what it means. In other words, tes is written tes. That's a concept of two, the repetition. Pois sounds like it means. That's a break. It's also two. So in other words, Rabbi Akiva is darshaning the actual, you explicit expression, the kishkes of the word. He's not even darshaning the meaning of the word. He's darshaning, putting up Gedalia, he's darshaning either the repetition of the letters of the word or darshaning the sound of the word. And both the repetition and the sound are communicating the notion, the most basic, elementary, empirical notion of two-ness. So that's this machlokes of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael, in my opinion, is an expression of the general difference in paradigm, right? That we spoke about the last year.
If the vav was between the pei and the taf, would we assume that there'd be no machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Yishmael? Because everyone would agree that there's no abstract meaning to.
Could possibly be. Yeah.
And why? How would you understand kind of the connection or the between an African word and a Hebrew word?
Oh, well, go. That's a whole. That's whatever. I mean, it's not the only time in the Chodesh you get a word from a different language. For example, the Gemara in Brachas speaks about Yagas Adusa, explicitly Aramaic. But I remember, I don't know if I remember this now, I remember that I once heard from Yankov Kamenetsky at Mesheva Brachas. Actually, I think it appears in Emes Yankov, but he wants to claim that it says Hatzfardeya. Tzfardeya is an Egyptian word. That's where the tzaddik doesn't have a dokish, because in Egyptian, they weren't madgish the tzaddik. But when it says Vatal Hatzfardeya, so he explains, because Rashi learns it's called the sheirut. It doesn't refer to the actual frog, the animal. It refers to the pestilence. So that becomes the Hebrew word. But I heard that at him one time in Shalosh Shudas in Tveria at my Sheva Brachas. But anyway, okay. Hashkafa Shakodaktam is not for drushes. In any case, but as an aside, as an aside, that's an important thing. Okay, now. Okay, so the only reason I want to bring this example is show how, in fact, this Machlokes of Akiva and Yishmael expresses itself in different places in Shas. And there are other places too, but this is, I think, a very interesting example. It's an example that everybody knows, the Toita phrases, etc., if you learn Menachos. Yeah?
Would Rabbi Triebitz recommend Gedalia Nadel's whole piece here on the Midos and the...
He has some beautiful pieces there, yeah. They're sharp and they're very nice. He doesn't go into all the Midos. He speaks about the first part of the Sefer, unfortunately, the second part of the Sefer, but then he said there's a warning there. But the first part of the Sefer is some beautiful typo. By the way, they published since he was Nifter his Chidushim on Shas, his Chidushim on Kalim, his Chidushim, there's 3 volumes. I mean, I don't know if this, whatever.
This book's on the internet.
Whatever, in any case, I'm not officially recommending it, but I saw it in the Sefer. It's a beautiful piece of text. Okay, fine. Now, I want to speak a little bit. We spoke about the drashas right now, and that's what we devoted the last 9 shiurim, right, and to the drashas of Chazal. We've spoken about simply the Yud Gimel Midos, and we've spoken about how they in other words, the process, the historical process they took, we spoke about before Hillel, Rabbi Yishmael, then Rabbi Akiva. The fact is, though, that we know that there was a change in the history of the oral law, of the Torah Shebi'al Peh, because at one point in history, specifically, for sure, at the time of Rebbe, where in fact the Ikar Limud of the Torah Shebi'al Peh focused not so much on the drushes as we have it today, the sifra and the sifri, but really on the mishnayos. In other words, we know that the Gemara, even though the Gemara itself, many times in the Mishnah says v'nahanimili, the Gemara will be the drasha, but the fact is that the most of the Torah Shebi'al Peh, the bulk of the halacha, originates in the Gemara, which clearly comes more to explain mishnayos than it is in fact actually coming to making drashas. Now, and the fact is that this is something that perhaps we've spoken about in other shiurim, but it's pretty clear that after the time of the Tanoim, then even though the Amoraim will actually evoke drashas to explain baraisas and mishnayos, nonetheless, it's just pretty clear that that after the time of the Tanoim, there are no original drashas that are coming to explicate new halachos which are not already found in the Tanaic corpus. I think we've spoken about this. There's certainly I have an article about this in Rishima, I think volume 2. But the question is, how did this happen? And what's interesting is that, and I speak about too in that article, I refer you to the article for details, but from the, it's clear from the Gemara and Hillel and Bnei Beseira that in fact actually the Gemara became a little bit of, in other words, the text of drashas a little bit became the mishna and not the psukim. The Gemara is a little bit type of a drasha on the mishnayos. The fact is that in several places, in Brachas, Rashi Heimar Aleph, Yud Aleph Mud Beis, Zayin Mud Beis, Rashi defines Gemara as the yishuv of mishnayos, Kisur Michsara, which is a type of a drasha on the Mishnah. When did this change take place? How did it take place? At what point did somehow the weight of the Torah Shebi'al Peh shift from exegesis of verse to, I would call, exegesis of Mishnah? We know that this certainly came about. And even though we have a sifra, the sifri, like the Rambam says explicitly, the Hakdama to the Mishnah Torah, Rav, who is the final redacted the sifra, that the Rambam says, wrote the sifra, redacted the sifra in order to explain the origins of the Mishnah. But the fact is that the Torah Habasura Lanu, which accounts for the majority of the halacha, begins with the Mishnah and then the Gemara. So the question is, at what point did this take place? At what point did it become, did the mishnayos become the text of drashas of exegesis, which not only competed, but I think actually resulted in the major body and corpus of the Torah Shebi'al Peh. At what point did this take place? Now, I don't have I'm telling you right now, I don't have a clear, obvious answer, but I have a hypothesis. And I'm going to reveal my hypothesis for the first time in history here on ashkafacircle.com. When do I think this took place? Now, first of all, you're all aware of the fact that there's a machlokes, a dispute, certainly among achronim. What is the earliest form? Is the mishnayik form the earliest form, or is the drasha the earliest form? And I think that just about every person in the last 150 years who's thought about these things has something to say about it. For example, the most famous two people who battle it out are the Yitzhak Isaac Kalevi, the Deres Rishonim, and I would say probably the Malbim. Even the Malbim is actually, addressing him. He presents his issue. The Malbim and Yelis HaShachar, presents 613 rules of exegesis, in which basically the Malbim created an entire rigorous system in which you could see how the halachas, all the halachas of the sifra and the sifri, actually emerge from the pasuk. And the deriving of Rishonim dismisses the Malbim completely. And even, he even makes a statement that there's not a single halacha that's learned from a pasuk. All the drushes are all asmachtas, and that really everything originates from the Mishnah Rishona, which comes from an earlier era, etc., etc. I don't know. Go into there was Rishona as part of his general agenda of establishing the Beseira, the antiquity of the Beseira, as opposed to the to hermeneutical logic, which might have been exercised and generated in later generations. But in any case, this is a famous machlokes between those Rishonim and the Malbim, and much is said about this. I mean, it's every few years that someone comes out with a new article, a new proof, what came first, what came last, etc., etc. So I would like to put my 2 cents in, okay? Now, it's interesting, there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, which I'm pretty sure, we must have quoted it previously. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, in Pevav Med Aleph, that the Gemara says, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Stam Masnisim Rabbi Meir. The Stam Mishnah goes like Rabbi Meir, Stam tosefta Rabbi Nechemia, Stam sifra Rabbi Yehuda, Stam sifri Rabbi Shimon, V'kulu aliba de Rabbi Akiva. So, Rabbi Yochanan's statement lists, first he lists Mishnah, then he lists tosefta, then he lists sifra, then sifri, and kulu aliba de Rabbi Akiva. What does it mean, kulu de Rabbi Akiva? Right? I mean, Rashi says, aliba de Rabbi Akiva means in Mashalom do mi Rabbi Akiva Omro. But I mean, what does it mean, Rabbi Akiva? They were Talmid of Rabbi Akiva, but the fact is that we have they're telling more argue Rabbi Akiva than Mishnah. And what does Mishnah have to do with sifra and sifri? I mean, the entire corpus. So that's one Gemara. There's another Gemara in the beginning of Megillah. Actually, it's just in several places, but one place in the beginning of Megillah. There's the first Mishnah of Megillah, which everybody knows, in Tabez Man Aleph. The Mishnah says in Megillah Nikres, B'Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Dal, B'Tes Vav, L'Pochas, V'Lo Yosel. And then, the Gemara says, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, the same Rabbi Yochanan, says, Zu divrei Rabbi Akiva stimasor. The dorish zman zmanam zmaneim. Etc., etc. In other words, once again, the same Rabbi Yochanan that appears in Sanhedrin, right? I mean, it appears other places too, obviously, but right? Zu divrei Rabbi Akiva stimasor. The dorish zman zmanam zmaneim. And Rashi actually, in Rabbi Akiva stimasor, Rashi actually brings offers 2 perushim. One perush he offers, he actually refers to the Gemara in Sanhedrin, in Pevav Med Aleph, and then he has a kasha on it because we see that the lashon appears not only by Rabbi Akiva, but then he goes on to another lashon that means that that's a stam mishnah that goes later to Rabbi Akiva. But what does he say? What does Rabbi Yochanan say? Zu de Rabbi Akiva stimasor the dorash, zman zmanam zmaneim. I mean, the Gemara begins by saying, how many of the Megillah is written in all these days? The Gemara makes a drasha, zman zmanam zmaneim. So I want to propose the following thing. I want to propose that what's special about what's called the Mishnas Rabbi Akiva. The Mishnas Rabbi Akiva. So I want to propose what's special about the Mishnas Rabbi Akiva is that before Rabbi Akiva, this is once again a hypothesis, before Rabbi Akiva, the mishnayos were taught stam and weren't the product necessarily of a drasha. They were taught stam. They were stam mishnayos like the deriving Rishonim. They were halachas. I mean, we know that Hillel came to Yerushalayim, and it was a halacha that we spoke about, everybody knew, and he brought a drasha on it. But in other words, it could possibly that the stam mishnayos were passed down from tradition, like the deriving Rishonim would say. Could it be that Rabbi Akiva changed things? Could it be that what marks the mishnah of Rabbi Akiva is that the Mishnah of Rabbi Akiva is the conclusion of a drasha from a pasuk. In other words, there are certain mishnayos, and I'm calling this, the pre-Rabbi Akiva mishnayos, which are mishnayos traditions, which come from time immemorial, from Beseira, and Chazal will give, let's say, drashas to explain them, but the halacha is not necessarily learned from the pasuk. The halacha is a tradition that somehow, when the pasuk is brought because Chazal, learned that halacha with respect to that pasuk. Right? Like, for example, but on the other hand though, right? Rabbi Akiva's mishnayos were different. Rabbi Akiva's mishnayos, after the pilpul of Rabbi Akiva in the drashas of the psukim, then he would, summarize it or, reach the conclusion, which would be what? Which would be the drasha, which would be the mishnah. In other words, the mishnah of Rabbi Akiva sits on top of a precipice of pilpul, of drashas, of hermeneutics, of logic, of dialectics. Now, so in other words, and that's what the Gemara in Sanhedrin is saying. What the Gemara in Sanhedrin is saying, when it says sifra, sifri, and mishnah is a liba de Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara is saying is that the Torah of Rabbi Akiva was a Torah which generated mishnayos as the conclusions of a pilpul of drashas, which we spoke about. In other words, we spoke about that the Torah of Rabbi Akiva, in other words, what happened is that the mishnah of Rabbi Akiva originates in the drasha from the pasuk. So the mishnah becomes a type of a Torah shebechsav. It's not a separate body, separate from the Torah shebechsav. It emerges from the Torah shebechsav. In other words, before Rabbi Akiva, we spoke about, turns out to are two separate things. That we saw in the sifra at the end of the Chukoisai. They're two separate things. The Torah Sav Torahs, Rabbi Yishmael, Torah Sav Torah Peh. Not only did Rabbi Akiva, through his drashas, combine the Torah Sav, but from the drashas, from the Torah Shabbat, Rabbi Akiva emerged a Torah Shabbat Mishnah, which comes from the Torah Shabbat called the Mishnah. In other words, the Mishnah of Rabbi Akiva is the Minahane Milei that the Gemara speaks about it. In other words, the Mishnah of Rabbi Akiva, the base of Rabbi Akiva's mishnayos are the process of drashas of pilpul of the Torah Shabbat, the pilpul, which we see the sifra and the sifri. That's Rabbi Akiva. In other words, what marks the Mishnah of Rabbi Akiva is that it sits on top of a process of pilpul and drashos, and therefore it's the precipice of this entire mountain of Torah Shabbat Peh. And that's what the Gemara means. Rabbi Yehuda means when he says, "Zu divrei Rabbi Akiva's timosa the dorish zban zbanam zbaneim." In other words, what's unique about Rabbi Akiva's timosa? It's the product of the drashas of Rabbi Akiva, zmanam zbaneim, as opposed to being a mishnah which was originally originated in a tradition. Yeah.
And why does it give the names of the Talmud of Rabbi Akiva? I'm not sure why each one is connected to a
because each Talmud, what happens is, when it says Kulam Alabit Rabbi Akiva, it was each Talmud, one Talmud specialized in sifri, which is B'midbar Devarim. One Talmud specialized in the Sifra, Vayikra. One Talmud specialized in what? In Mishnah. But Kulam Alibri Rabbi Akiva is like M theory and string theory. In other words, according to Rabbi Akiva, it's all one big thing. Everything's connected. That's in Rabbi Akiva. In other words, the Mishnah of Rabbi Akiva is the product of a grand unified field theory, which originates in the thing. Which means, what is it? What is the consequence of this? Is that the Mishnah of Rabbi Akiva is like a Torah Shebechsav. So therefore, this begins the process which Rebbe, 2 generations later, will dash in the mishnayos. In other words, to darshan a mishnah is like darshaning a pasuk, because the mishnah emerges from Rabbi Akiva in the Torah Shebechsav. Now, based upon this,
This is not like Rashi.
No. This is, I'm learning the Gemara differently. Now, maybe you can read it into Rashi, but I'm learning the Gemara differently. Now, what I want to say is that it's very interesting that what do we have over here? In other words, we have the procession, right? We have Rabbi Akiva, we have Rabbi Meir, who was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, and then we have Rebbe. Now, there's a very interesting Gemara in Eruvin, Yud Gimel and Beis, and there the Gemara speaks about Rabbi Meir, and they couldn't be Omer al Daitoi, they couldn't understand him, right? And then Rebbe says, that, why am I so smart? I'm so smart because I saw the back of Rabbi Meir, right? I saw the front of my man had been smarter. So now the question I used to ask in Beis Yosef, so why do you see the front of him? So go to the other side of the class and see the shield and see the front. So to use the derech that I've been posing over the last shiurim, Agadas and Chazal, let's come to tell us stories. They come to tell us about Chazal themselves. What does it mean to say that Rebbe says, why am I so smart? I saw the back of Rabbi Meir. The answer is, the back of Rabbi Meir is the very essence of the Mishnah of Rabbi Akiva. The Mishnah is the precipice. The Mishnah is almost like of an n-dimensional manifold. You have an n-1 boundary. The Mishnah, if I look and examine the Mishnah, I'll be able to uncover all the pilpul, all the logic, all the drushes, all of the genius, all of the drushes of Kisei Oisis of Rabbi Akiva. In other words, the Mishnah is somehow this boundary, this interface between the generations after Rabbi Meir, will be dashing the Mishnahs, and between the logic and the genius and the hermeneutics and the pilpul and dialectics of Rabbi Akiva. So that's why Rabbi is not interested in Rabbi Meir's face. He's interested in Rabbi Meir's back, because that's what he has recourse with. In other words, the Mishnah of Rabbi Meir somehow captures the logic of Rabbi Akiva, which gives the Mishnah a tremendous amount of hermeneutical and rational depth, and it's up to the later generations to dash this out for the Mishnah itself. That's what Rabbi means, but Rabbi Meir, you can't be Omer al Daitoi. Because from the other side, who knows what came into it? That's the pshat of the Gemara in Daf Yud Gimel and Beis. So in other words, what I want to say is that we describe the Torah Sheb'al Peh, it goes up and then comes down again. In other words, we come from we go up from the original and from Hillel, Rabbi Yishmael, and then we go down again to Rabbi Akiva and go up and down. In other words, what happens is that we emerge from the Torah Shebechsav, and we create a Mishnah from that, and then by dashing the Mishnah, we bring it back again into the Torah Shebechsav. And that's why Rabbi Akiva's Mishnah made it possible, which later would become the Gemara of Rebbe, with the mishnayos now served as the hermeneutical text of exegesis in place of the Torah Shebechsav. That's what I want to say is this important Yisrael. Now, of course, so in other words, if you ask me who do you paskin like, the Derech Rishonim or the Malbim, I would say I paskin like the Derech Rishonim up to before Rabbi Akiva. After Rabbi Akiva, the halacha is like the Malbim. So, in any case, which is the important thing, which I want to bring out, it's important, is that the truth of the Torah, I've always spoken about this, is not what's called historical truth, but it's called textual truth. In other words, I haven't brought in any of the Dead Sea Scrolls, I haven't brought in the Temple Scroll, which the experts bring. I'm not really a person, I don't believe that you should use archaeology to understand the Torah. You know, it's good for, I don't know. But in any case, what do we need archaeology? The text itself is telling us what's going on. In other words, the truth of the Torah is the truth how the text understood itself. And And when we look at these agaditas, we shouldn't think of them as being only, nice, stories with, Musa and his pilos. But actually, the agaditas of Chazal are actually the way in which Chazal are expressing and exposing us to the actual methodology and process and techniques which Chazal used throughout the different generations. Okay? So in other words, this is my hypothesis. My hypothesis is that the role of Mishnah changes pre-Rabbi Akiva and post-Rabbi Akiva. And it was Rabbi Akiva, so in other words, not only did Rabbi Akiva, in fact, combine the Torah Shab Torah Peh, but Rabbi Akiva actually created from the Torah Shabbat a new Torah Shabbat called the Mishnah. This enables the Gemara, and later, 2 generations afterwards, so Rabbi begins the Shisa Gemara, to actually use the Mishnah as the exegetical text upon which to generate the further, halachas which would be needed for, the rest of the history of Klal Yisrael. Yeah.
So Rabbi Akiva, so prior to Rabbi Akiva, there was this kind of accepted mishnah.
Right.
Which
and it would bring it right to a pasuk. Right.
Wasn't necessarily connected or correlated to any drushes or psukim.
Not necessarily, right. Well, it could have been learned together with the pasuk, but there wasn't a logical connection.
And, and after Rabbi Akiva, it's his mishnayos, his teachings, become the Torah Shabbat and the text.
Right.
So it wasn't only the generation of Rabbi Akiva when drushes were being used to understand or to
I think so, because we see clearly that the Stam Sifra, the Pilpul Sifra, that's only the Rabbi Akiva, the Sifra Rabbi Akiva.
So only that kind of fleeting moment in history.
That's what I think.
Like it's a bridge.
Right, that's what I think. Now, the fact is that, like I said before, this hypothesis. Can I prove it, this and that? Well, Maisa, what you'd have to do is go through the entire Torah, throw Shas, all the Sifra Sifri, and see the way Beis Hillel Beis Shammai dashim Sukkim, and the way, at Rabbi Akiva dashim Sukkim. Many of the drushes of Beis Shammai and Hillel are much more like, in other words, they're like, the more, like, for example, the machlekes of Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, the Fetrak of Brachos, for example, whether you say Kriya Shema necessarily lying down, it's not really like a logical drasha. In other words, they make the halacha shenema, like it says, but you don't see any. It's like they have the halacha as it says b'shopov kumecha. In other words, first they say the halacha as it says b'shopov kumecha. It's not that. In other words, you don't see any technique and logic by which you're going from the pasuk to the drasha. I think there's a halacha like this, and that was the way in which they read the pasuk. That was accepted when the halacha b'kubos of the Rambam. That's the way they read the pasuk. That was the meaning of the pasuk. But in other words, if you go to a drasha of Rabbi Akiva, in the sifra, they're much more complicated, much more, and Rabbi Akiva comes to the halacha at the very end of the drasha. First he says a hypothesis, then he says kalech l'derech zeh, kalech l'derech zeh. In other words, according to Rabbi Akiva, first you begin with the drasha, and then you end with the halacha. In Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, first you begin with the halacha, and then you end with the drasha. Now, of course, as a klal, I'm sure that, my dear listeners will, email me all the tests to this and everything, so I'm saying it's only a hypothesis, but my claim is that in Chazal, the medium is the message, meaning that, in fact, the way they say it is the order in which, the progression, the logical development took place. In other words, in Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, first they say the halacha, you should memorize it like this. Rabbi Akiva, it's different. First is the entire pilpul, for a derivation, there's different, possibilities, and then at the end, there's a maskana. So, in other words, this alludes to the difference in the meaning of the mishnayos. In any case, all the rayas that the Malbim brings, or the Rosh Hashanah brings, and Tzvahaf means, in other words, they're all true. It depends upon which generation and which the kufa. But I want to say that's really, in a certain sense, the most important consequence of Rabbi Akiva. Which means is that really, in a certain sense, we're going to go back really to the Ravid. The Ravid, remember in the beginning of the Sifra, we raised the question, what's the purpose of learning the Yud Gimel Midos, the baraisas of Rabbi Yishmael? And the answer is, says the Ravid, because the baraisas of Rabbi Yishmael gives us an understanding until the origins, it gives us a munah in the Torah, what is the Torah Shebe'al Peh? Where does it come from? What is it based upon? In other words, and this is very, very important. We have to see the Torah Shebe'al Peh is not something that someone made up. It really is the process of a process, which originates, in the Moshe Rabbeinu, Torah Shebe'al Peh, etc., etc. And what we've done is that we've gone one step further and not even spoken about, the drushes, but actually the mishnayos. The mishnayos are very, very, in my opinion, very inextricably linked with the drushes. The mishnayos is not separate drushes. And actually that's what the Rambam says. The sifra, says the Rambam, the sifra of Rav, was redacted in order to explain the basis of the mishnayos. But the sifra, of course, is the Liber of Rabbi Akiva. Right now, this is not to say that mishnayos are based on the Shammai too. What I'm saying is that where I need a basis of a mishnah is an expression, right, of the peculiar nature, the unique nature of the mishnah of Rabbi Akiva. And this is something which is, of course, this is something which, it's hypothesis to think about this, but I think that, from the rayas, the passages we've seen in the Gemara seem very much to point to this thing.
This is
Yeah.
Rambam in the Hakdama of the Mishnah?
Right. The Rambam in this Hakdama to the Mishnah Torah. No. In Mishnah Torah. Hakdama to the Mishnah Torah. The Rambam says it's literally like that. Okay. So, okay. In any case, that's the that's my hypothesis, and but to test out this hypothesis, I'm not going to have the opportunity now, nor am I going to have the opportunity next week either, because actually. At this point, I think that this is going to have to really end the series of Shuvah Midos. There's much more to speak about, not only this hypothesis, but the fact is that I think that the series of Shiurim there are probably an introduction to Yigul Midos. I mean, there are a lot of technical details to be worked out, but I'm not sure that it's Shavah L'chol Nefesh. In any case, with an understanding of the structure of the Midos, both the structure of the Midos and where the Midos are placed in the historical context, I think that, I hope that, this has contributed to our understanding of the Midos as we work out the details in every drasha that we come and encounter, either in the Shas or in the Midrash halacha. But in any case, 10 shiurim is, every world is 10 sfiras. 10 shiurim is a davar shalem. Of course, I probably left out most of the things that I should have spoken about, but I think that Zil Gemar, which we say, that people could, or in mathematics, the proof is left to the reader. But in any case, I think that I've tried to, present a overall understanding of the Yigul Midos, not only what they are, but their role in the Teresh Bial Peh, in the halacha Musul B'Yadeinu from Moshe Rabbeinu, right, until the Tanoim, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishmael, Hillel, and I think that we've, hopefully, we've been able to express, Hadamas and introductions and Yesaidas that, will be helpful when we, when we sit around and we think about, the drashas that Chazal made. But in any case, at this point now, at least in the meanwhile, in the Vaila, the work is over, right, before we take it up another time. So, in any case, I think that we'll...
Can we give an introduction to next week's series?
Okay, in next week's series, I've been coming attractions, but due to quote-unquote popular demand, I think we're going to begin a new series of shiurim, which is really going to focus on what's called the development of the halacha, from its sources in the Shas and the Gemara, to the Rishonim, to the Go'onim, to the Rishonim, and to the Shulchan Aruch, and the Nosei Kelim, and the Poskim. In other words, it's going to be a shiur in how the halacha develops. And we're not going to give a series of lectures on it, but actually we're going to operate in the order of the Gemara. And the first Gemara we're going to pick is naturally brachos. Daf Yomi begins with brachos. And we're going to take the different sugyas and brachos in order and try to not only illuminate how we get from the Gemara to the halacha, but also the general ideas and principles, right? The ideas and principles of how the halacha is actually extracted from the sources. In other words, it's going to be really a double shia in, number one, what are the principles of the halachic process, and at the same time, seeing how it actually works in the specific sugyas that we're going to do. So we'll have an interesting understanding of really how the Rishonim understood the Gemara. Now, of course, so this is going to, of course, require an understanding of the very text of the Gemara itself. What is the Gemara doing? How did the Gemara understand halacha? How did the Rishonim understand the Gemara? How did the Rishonim understand the Yerushalmi, the Bavli, the tosefta, etc., etc.? So basically, we're going to try to be as what?
And minhag, what role does minhag play in the
We'll
process?
speak about minhag, we'll speak about, who can argue on who, what's called interpretation. Do you argue by interpreting, or do you interpret by arguing? In other words, we're going to go into all the vital issues of really how the halacha evolved from the Gemara to the Shulchan Aruch, to the Poskim, and we're going to try to somehow illuminate the fundamentals of that process, which, of course, will be relevant in any surgery that a person learns if he, Chas v'Shalom learns and leave the hill to say. So, in any case...
In a sense of taking the redaction of the Talmud Shir... and
Right,
moving
so
it forward.
actually, this is right. This is the next step. The redaction in the Chasimus HaShash, redaction of the Talmud, we showed how the Gemara took the mishnayos and came to the halacha. The halacha came to the conclusion of the Gemara. And now we'll see how we come from the Gemara to the, to the Rishonim and to the Shulchan Aruch. Of course, everything, is always a circle, because if we discuss the Rishonim, we're going to discuss the Gemara, and so basically it's going to be like a circle. We're going to go back to the very beginning of the redaction of the Talmud Shir when we finish. But that's good, because everything is all everything. Everything is contained in everything. And that's the union of bechinas, that everything is contained in everything else. So in any case, those of you who are interested in really the understanding the halachic process on a textual level, so therefore you can stay tuned for next week. We'll begin Mir Hashem the first shiur on Monday, and we'll see how far we go. Mir Hashem. Until then, from an undisclosed place in Yerushalayim, Kodesh, Kol Tuv.